Seijiro Takeshita is Professor of Management and Information at the University of Shizuoka in Japan, and he joins us on the show. Good morning, Professor. Presumably staying in power is top of mind for the LDP, with these elections, upper and lower elections due next year. And also we know that Kishida is not very popular. So help us understand what's at stake for Japan in this increasingly volatile region.
As you just reported, I think LDP is quite desperate to regain its positioning, which they've lost because of several scandals. But at the same time, we'd like to have a secure, strong leader which could comply with the aggression, as you just reported, from China, Russia, and North Korea, and also have a bridging of good ties with a new president that's coming up in the United States, which is very unclear. And we all know that the Free World Alliance is very much dependent on how it goes in the United States in November. So somebody who can juggle all these things together, along with, the economic perspective, is somebody that, the people are yearning for.
It seems like a crowded race, Professor. Out of the 9 candidates, let's try to zoom into one of the frontrunners, the Shinjiro Koizumi. Just how significant is the potential win of a young leader for Japan's political landscape? And do you think he can effectively balance modern reforms with the conservative values that have long dominated the LDP?
I have great doubts about that, unfortunately. I think he's still too unexperienced. And and I think most of the Japanese voters, when they looked and listened to his argumentation, talks, discussions, it's very clear that he is very critical on many issues, but he's not really coming up with solutions that gives us a big nod. In other words, he's very much like the opposition, which basically depicts wrongdoings of the current government, but really not coming up with a convincing argument to rectify that. So, I think he's still quite inexperienced, and I think he really revealed that in the past month or so. So I think, although he has a very strong will of reform, which is great, but, I still think that he needs a little more experience and understanding of the Japanese economy and structure.
Okay. How about Takaichi? Her candidacy as Japan's first female prime minister could represent a pivotal moment in gender politics. What are the key challenges that she faces? And is Japan ready for a female leader in such a prominent role?
Well, I think so. I think it's really about time. That said, of course, our gender gap is the worst in OECD. And we still have a very, very long way of, basically filling this gap. But that said, yes, she could possibly do a very strong role in filling that gap. She is an advocate, as you reported, of Mr. Abe's policy, and there are many MPs in Japan that is basically following her ideology. So she will have a fairly good, I think, strong support once we come into a runoff vote. So this is where, I think Ishiba-san, who I think you'll be asking next, has to be very careful, because in the past as well, in 2012, Ishiba-san had the highest vote in the first round, but, lost off to, Shinzo Abe on the second, runoff vote. So, this is one area that I think Ishiba-san has to be very careful about her surge of popularity.
Professor Takeshita, I've been reading a number of reports, and a number of experts fear the return of revolving door politics in Japan after a period of stability. Do you share this concern as well? And if so, why so?
Well, I'd say that, the revolving doors, which he saw, had a lot to do with internal politics. And I think the LDP knows very well that the Japanese public is sick and tired of that. And we wouldn't want to regress back into the days when Democratic Party of Japan almost ruined Japan in the 3 years of their ruling. So, all those people who are especially engaged in the economy know that, they cannot afford to have that kind of silly mistake again. So I think LDP is quite aware of that. And I think we also need to know that structural transition or reform takes time. And I think, the voters and also the corporations have to realize that this is going to be a long run race if you want to focus particularly on issues like structural transformation. So, I think people are starting to understand that, we shouldn't and we wouldn't, want to see that revolving doors of prime minister from here onwards.
You brought up economy, Professor. So, as with many elections worldwide, economic policy is really the obvious battleground here. Given the differing visions of the candidates, what do you foresee for the future of Abenomics? I mean, can any of the frontrunners realistically address Japan's, structural economic challenges?
Well, the trajectory of the third arrow that he's given out, which is structural transition, takes a long time. We still have so much time really to, give an answer to that. His first arrow did work, weakening the yen, which induced the Japanese exporters. But unfortunately, the corporation, in my opinion, did not follow. They didn't raise, the pay, which meant that, the rise of private consumption wasn't going to take place. And finally, after 20 years, from this year onwards, corporations are finally starting to raise their, pay. I think one of the problems that we have is that, we tend to criticize the government, and often rightfully so. But the corporations and the people really aren't really engaged with that kind of move. So I think we really need to have a total mindset, not only amongst the politicians, but, amongst the voters as well.
Professor, when it comes to foreign policy, do the 9 candidates, differ to a great extent? I mean, in particular, I ask you about the relationship, the current relationship with the United States vis-a-vis what's happening with China and, of course, North Korea.
Well, all of the 9 candidates, and I would say especially the top 3, which you just mentioned, who has the highest popularity, they all understand the importance of, Japan-U.S. relationship, and they know that that is a core, and this is a must. The attitude towards the aggression that we're seeing from the unitarian states like that of Russia or China or North Korea, I think, all 3 candidates are very, very strong and hawkish, unlike many other wishy-washy Japanese politicians, which really did not clarify their stance, which worried a lot of Japanese and which gave a lot of opportunity for these unitarian states. So I think as far as, foreign policy is concerned, firstly, ambiguity in the states is something that we don't know until November. But certainly, I think they all understand, especially with the economic ties, and also quite a lot of what we call a wall against these unitarian states, particularly China. We need to hold a very strong scrum together with the United States. So I think they all recognize that to a full extent.
All right, Professor, we do have to leave it there. Really appreciate you talking to us on Asia First this morning. You have a great day, sir. Seijiro Takeshita is Professor of Management and Information at the University of Shizuoka.